comes to our spiritual lives, many of us have dealt with self-doubt. We've dealt with wondering, where is God? Where was God? Why did he allow this to happen? Why is this not happening? Why can't I hear him? Da 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 da. All these things we have all dealt with and may be dealing with, me included. And so when I thought about this week's episode, I thought about talking about spiritual doubt and what do we do when it happens. Welcome back to another episode of the You, Me, and Jesus podcast, where it is you, me, and it's Jesus, and we talk about all things God, Jesus, Christianity, walking this walk and living this like a practical life as a Christian. And so if you're listening to this, thank you so much. If you're watching, thank you so much for watching. Make sure that you like and subscribe to this channel. That way you're notified every single time we have an episode, and it lets YouTube push the content out. And if you enjoy this on the podcast, please write a review and subscribe to the podcast. That way we show the podcast players that people like the show. So we're talking about overcoming spiritual doubt. And as always, I am going to tell you my personal opinion, my experiences, and all those types of things. And so you know that I have been doing this show or this podcast, whatever, for years. Okay. I got started with this podcast right around 2017, I think it was, maybe 2017. And it was not because I wanted to. It wasn't because I was like, oh, I'm going to inspire the world with my relationship with Jesus. No, I was driving home from a conference where was that conference? Somewhere in Texas, and maybe San Antonio. And I had just saw Danny Johnson. They did a huge deliverance. It was a whole deal. Like the last night night one of her conference. And it was pretty darn amazing, and when I was driving home, I just heard God say, you, me, and Jesus, write it down. And I was like, okay. And so I wrote it down while I was driving. I just kind of spoke it into my phone. And later he finally told me, he said, I want you to go live on social media and I want you to start talking about your relationship with me or whatever. And I was like, I don't really have much to share because I was battling depression. I didn't know it, but I was battling depression after going through the divorce. And I'm not a Bible scholar or whatever. So I was just like, who am I to come online and talk to people about whatever? But I did it. I started just in my living room talking. Eventually, a couple of years later, I started bringing on guests, inviting people to come in and have conversations with my guests live and all that. And then I fell off for a couple of years because lots of different things happened. So I fell off for a couple of years. And then finally, I was just like, I could feel the tug, but I also felt the conviction. And so I got back doing it. But I didn't do this because I had all the faith in the world. I didn't do this because God was so near and all that. I did it because I felt like it's what he wanted me to do. But of course, in all that time, I had lots of doubts. Why am I doing this? Does anybody really care about this? And all the type of stuff. In the midst of that, outside of the show, I would begin to deal with my own stuff. When I first was moving to California, I wasn't doing well financially. And so my cost of living went up, so to speak. God had me rent a house and then rent out rooms to students. And there was just all these things that kind of went along with that journey. And my business, it just was not doing well. Like it was just not doing well. It was barely, keeping me afloat. And I had so many moments where it was just like, this is terrible. This is not good for me. This is not working or whatever. And I was asking myself, like, God, what is going on? What are you doing? Why am I not hearing you? Why is it not happening for me? And honestly, I can't say that I was always hearing anything, I've been talking to you guys about a little bit that I have to have this really big invasive surgery. And I just got a date for the end of November. And I basically have these growths on my uterus. It's like a lot of them. And some of them are really, really, really big. And so it's like, my stomach is just like huge. I wish you could see it, but it's just like really huge. Like if you look at me in photos, you'll just think that I'm just overweight, which is fine. But my stomach, it is like 80% these fibroid tumors that are on the inside of my stomach. And this has been a process I've been going through for the last 4 years. And I've just been like, God, you supernaturally heal. You do this, you do that. You can do that. And honestly, he has not done that. Like, I have not experienced a healing miracle to where they are no longer in my body, where my body shrunk. That hasn't happened for me yet. I'm hoping for it, but it hasn't happened yet. And that has caused me to have lots of doubts about God, Jesus, Holy Spirit, about miracles, signs, and wonders. Because I'm like, I'm doing all the things. I'm laying my hands. I'm all these people praying for me. I'm going to the miracle services. I'm doing all this stuff, and nothing is happening. And it caused me to really doubt, who God is, who God can be, and who He can be for me. Because you hear all these stories of other people, and you're just like, well, He did it for them. He was supposed to do it for me, right? Not to mention, I have been divorced now for, is it 10 years now? Is it 10? What year is this? We're in 2003. I'm like, when did I get married? I can't even remember. It's been so long. I think it's been 10 years, maybe close to 10 years. And I've been doing all the work, therapy, just all the things. And I have not met anyone. No, listen, I have had no one in 10 years try to pursue me except for a homeless man. I was like, I'm not kidding. I was at the library and a homeless man comes up to me and hits on me. That is basically the first time that a man has directly hit on me in 10 years. And I have been like, here I am saving myself, not engaging in anything with men, not engaging in anything with myself. I'm like, and then watching all these other girls and guys like meet people, get married and all this. And I'm just like, what in the world's going on, And so it has caused me to doubt God, like significantly, like all the time. And, amongst many other things that I could mention today. And so I wanted to share all that because as you are listening, I need you to first understand that I'm just like you. Okay, that even though I'm doing this show, I am just like you. Okay, which means that I am not immune to things not happening, to things happening. I am not immune. These things happen to all of us, and we all get this opportunity to just kind of go with God. And so here is what I am learning, like as in active, not like learned because I'm in it, Okay, what I am learning is that even though what I want to have happen hasn't happened, period, or yet, God still is, right? And that God is still a miracle worker. God is still a healer. He is still a provider. He's still a restorer. He does love marriage. All these, he is still all those, things, right? Whether that has manifested in my life the way that I want it to or not, right? He is still all those things. And for me, when I am, which I'm on the journey right now, when I am on this journey and I am trying to navigate what is happening, what isn't happening, and all that, one of the things that I do is I like to remind myself of what God has already done for me, right? So it's like, okay, He hasn't done this, this, and this yet, so I can't focus on that. But what I can focus on is what has He done, right? So on my refrigerator, there's like a little sheet that shows like prayers answered and all this type of stuff. And that is a really, really big reminder of are the things that God has done. Even though He hasn't done what I want Him to do here, this is what He has already done, period. That's number one. The second thing that I like to do is I like to remind myself of the stories I've heard of how He has come through for other people. People I personally know or people of stories I have heard at church, all right, or in church settings or Christian settings or whatever. That if I hear these different stories, and there's a possibility that it's going to help my doubts, okay? Because my doubts are real. They feel how they feel. And the only way for them to change is for God to do what I want Him to do, which mostly does not always happen the way or when we want it to happen. And or for me to actually experience like what is happening for other people or reminders of what He has already done for me. But what I also like to do when I am dealing with like spiritual battles and doubts, I like to call on a friend. And so this is why it's important to have Christian friends, but people that really, really love God, are fully submitted to God, that are obedient to God, like radically obedient to God, because that means that they are walking with Him and they're on the journey as well. And they're on the journey with you as well. And when I reach out to those people, oftentimes what they will be willing to do is listen. They're willing to share stories of what God has done for me, what God has done for them, what I have seen Him do for them, stories of other people. But then also, they are willing to pray. Okay? They are willing to pray, because one of the things that I know is that when we are dealing with like these spiritual issues, when we're dealing with like the doubts and all that, oftentimes it's hard to pray during that time, or oftentimes it's hard to hear during that time. Because for me, the way I am today is that even if I'm dealing with something spiritual or anything, I've learned the art of being able to just talk to God about it and pray about it. Even if I don't have the answer, I still talk to Him about it and I pray about it, and so that helps. But not everybody is in that stage where when stuff hits the fan, that their go-to is, let me pray and talk to God about it and believe that He's going to talk back to me. Because when you're dealing with spiritual doubts, that means you're doubting what you hear. You're doubting that He's hearing you. You're doubting. And so you're in that phase of like doubting. So if you have friends that know God, know you, and that will come in and pray, then oftentimes, it just brings you comfort. You may not have the immediate answer, but you'll have that comfort, okay? But also one thing I like to do a lot of times is I like to go to my prophetic friends, not just my Christian friends, but my friends that like hear God so clear. And one of the things that I like to do with them is with my prophetic friends, I don't like to give them too much information, because if you give people too much information, then sometimes it can conjure up what they think they're hearing. Not in a negative way, like they're just trying to conjure something up. But I mean that if a person only gets this and then they go to God about it and God shows them this, then we are more likely to have heard God clearly. We're more likely to not have interfered with what we heard, because we only knew this from a person and then God shared all that, right? So I'll have people come to me all the time and they're like, hey, I'm just needing a word from the Lord, on the prayer team or whatever. And I'm like, okay. And I'm like, well, I don't know this person, but let me just pray. And so I just start to pray and I just start saying what it is I believe that I'm hearing. And oftentimes it will be exactly what they need to hear, because I didn't have too much information. I'm just fully relying on whatever I'm being told at this moment by God. So I like to go to my prophetic friends so they can like hear God and on my behalf, because sometimes I'm just not hearing, you know what I mean? And so now sometimes God don't tell them, but sometimes He does, and I'm able to get some hearing from what it is that they are hearing. Okay. But then also I like to go to mentors, that they can also pray and hear as well. But one of the biggest things that I have found, that in the times where I'm dealing with a battle and doubts and I'm not hearing God or whatever's going on, that when push comes to shove, one of the things I will do is fast. Okay, I will fast. And most times it is TV or it is the social media, music, whatever. So that way I'm not hearing anything else but God, right? So if I'm not watching TV, not listening to music, not looking at YouTube, it's just me in a house and I'm cooking or cleaning or talking to my cats or praying or whatever. There's distractions, and the ability not to hear God really goes away. Usually every single time I do some type of fast from TV, music, whatever, I hear God so clear, and it helps me get back in line with where I'm supposed to be and where I'm supposed to go. So that's one of the things that hands down has always worked for me. But in addition to that, I have communion cups. I don't have any in my office or whatever, but I typically take communion. So if I'm like really in something or whatever, and I'm like, all right, let me just clear the clutter. Let's fast. Let's get back to taking communion every single day. That's what I'll do. That's kind of like me going into the surgery. I'm nervous. I have never had my body cut like ever. You know what I mean? And I'm getting ready to have my body cut. I'm going under, all this stuff, whatever, you know? And I'm like, okay, there's some fear I have around it. And so I'm like, what am I going to do? Probably leading up to it, I'm going to be on a fast. I am going to minimize people that are in my ear talking about whatever they're talking about. Going to be taking communion. I'll probably take communion the day of my surgery. As soon as they allow me to, I will take communion in the hospital or at home. I will have a group of people that will come pray for me the night before my surgery. I will have, as soon as they allow, I'll have one of those same people come into my hospital room and pray over me from when I had the surgery. You know, I'll probably have them come into my house, pray over my house so I can heal in my home. And you may say, well, that's true. Listen, it is a lot. But I'm like, when you're dealing with whatever you're dealing with, which is the nervousness about surgery, your body healing, whatever, like just whatever the doctors and nurses may have spoke over me while I was under, because, you know, they just be talking about whatever they talking about. And I'm just like, I don't know what they be talking about, but we going to just handle our business spiritually and just like take care of all that. And that's just going to bring me so much peace. You know what I mean? So I hope that you found this valuable. Like, the whole goal here is always leading you back to God. It's not just saying, oh, King, you said this, or King, you said that. No. This is always about, how do I get you to a place where you always go back to God, right? Because it's not important for you to know what I think, what I say, or whatever happens on our channel or on the podcast, but it's more so about like, I heard what I said, let me go back to God with that. I heard what she said, let me go back to God about that. Because more than anything or anyone, the number one person we need to be talking to, especially when we're dealing with doubts, is the one that created everything and everyone and created us, which is God, okay? So if you enjoyed this episode, please let me know down in the comments. You can ask any questions that you may have, but make sure you subscribe to the channel. And if you are listening on the podcast, hit subscribe to the show and then write a review. All right? Thanks so much for watching and listening.